Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Constitution Center. My name is Madison. I'm a member of the center's education team, and I'm so excited that you're all here for a special program all about students and the civil rights movement. Monday is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we are celebrating civil rights all month long with a series of very fun programs highlighting a number of key figures in the civil rights movement, the core constitutional arguments at the heart of the movement, the role that the Supreme Court plays in the movement, and all of that fun stuff. So I'm very excited to kick off this program. I'm going to kick it over to my wonderful colleague, Brian, who is actually live at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. And Brian is going to share with us one of the best stories, one of my favorite stories about the civil rights movement. And he's going to be focusing on students, particularly a group called the Little Rock Nine. So if you have questions for Brian throughout the program, pop those into the chat or the Q&A box, and I'll make sure that we get those questions answered. But without further ado, Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk to us a little bit more about the civil rights movement.
Thank you, Madison. Yeah, it's a really exciting story to be able to share with all of you folks. Now, maybe some of us are pretty familiar or we've heard of the Little Rock Nine before, but there's a great tale of, well, as we are the National Constitution Center, of we the people and our Constitution and being used as this great defender of civil rights, and how students themselves, many high school students, were able to be at the forefront of seeing us live up to those constitutional ideals. Before I get into that story of the Little Rock Nine, of how they were so instrumental, I wanted to give a little bit of background, just how it came to this, that point in 1957 during the school year, where the nation was watching what was going on at Little Rock Central High School. We can actually trace the events and the cause back to almost 60 years earlier, more than 60 years earlier, in 1896. There's a story of a Supreme Court case of a man named Homer Plessy. And this one doesn't have to do with school at all. Homer Plessy is someone who he attempts to board a train car that is whites only in Louisiana. And the argument that he and others make with that segregated train cars, people are discriminated against based on their race, were unconstitutional. That they went against the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, which had been added about 30 years earlier, almost 30 years earlier, and said that all people born in the United States are citizens of the United States, that we ought to have equal protection of the law. However, what happens in that case in 1896, Mr. Plessy loses, and the Supreme Court says in their decision that separate facilities, train cars or stations, restrooms, schools even, these public accommodations, these public spaces, you can segregate. They can be separate as long as they are separate but equal. Everyone has access to trains, to schools, to public restroom facilities, other public spaces. Segregation is permissible and segregation is constitutional. Now, over the next few decades, people, of course, did not agree with that. They thought that was wrong to separate folks by race. And there were a number of challenges to this idea. But in the end, the one that really overturns this is a case related to students. Again, it's called Brown versus Board of Education and involves a girl named Linda Brown in Topeka, Kansas. And she attempted to go to a school that was white only, was denied. And in her case, as it makes its way to the Supreme Court agrees with Linda Brown and her family and other students around the country who felt that treating them like they are not welcome in one school because of their color of their skin, because of their ethnicity, is unfair and is unconstitutional. The court says they are correct, that separate can never be equal, and that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, that phrase equal protection means equal protection. They should have that access. You cannot segregate students in these public schools, and segregation broadly. Now, following up on that decision, the Supreme Court uses the word, and I'm going to throw a complicated term out there for you folks. They say with all deliberate speed. They say, all right, schools around the country, like that one that Linda Brown went to, have to make a plan all deliberate speed, as quickly as they can, to desegregate. If their school districts have schools for white students and for Black students or for non-white students, they have to make a plan as soon as possible to end that separate but equal policy and bring students, regardless of race, together. And that is where our story of the Little Rock Nine comes together. The Little Rock, Arkansas School District made a plan for how the schools should be desegregated. And it was not going to be every school in the entire district all at once on the same day in the same year. The plan is initially that they would desegregate Little Rock Central High School in the 1957 school year. And Daisy Bates of the Arkansas National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, she helps prepare 9 high school students to attend Little Rock Central, to be really around the country the first students to actually follow through with desegregating their schools with that deliberate speed. But the night before they were to begin their very first day of school at this new school, there is a challenge to them. That Supreme Court decision was unpopular in many of these states and in many of these school districts that had separate but equal schools. And the governor of Arkansas, Orval Faubus, wants to see these students prevented from attending the school. It would have the National Guard, the Arkansas National Guard, called in to prevent these students from attending school. They, of course, feel that this is still not right, that the government should not be able to do so. And many activists, including Thurgood Marshall, future Supreme Court Justice, and Martin Luther King Jr., are filing cases in court to block this, to stop this, to say that, to follow that order, that all deliberate speed, that they have to see students into the classrooms as soon as possible. But it takes some time. We'd see in a few weeks later, around September 23rd, these students are finally able to attend class. But there are, after being blocked by a white mob on the 4th of September from entering, a crowd of angry fellow students and members of the community opposed to integrating schools basically stopped them from going to school that day. It takes until the 23rd, where they have an escort from police to go to school. However, after more and more concerns about the safety of the Little Rock Nine, they only end up attending school for about 3 hours that day. And so we have the question of, are these state governments, these local governments, going to actually enforce this and see that these students are able to get an education that they have a right to? What ends up happening is we see the President of the United States would step in. The idea is that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. All of these folks in office have the duty to uphold the Constitution. And the Supreme Court said that the Constitution says that schools cannot be separate, but equal. And President Dwight Eisenhower nationalizes the Arkansas National Guard, and he sends in the United States Army's 101st Airborne, the Army, to escort these students to school, to see that they are able to attend and get that fair opportunity at an education. And from that point, the students with that safe escort at Arkansas, at Little Rock Central, are able to attend. But they face a lot of awful treatment from their fellow students, other members of the community. There are attacks on some of the students as well. And they still, however, ultimately they persevere and they are able to complete that school year. But I have to say, folks, that's not the end of the story either. After all of the challenges, the conflict between the governor and the federal government, and the question of what happens next, because this was one school in Little Rock with just 9 students. The governor of the state, Orval Faubus, again, tries to have it suspended, the further integration of schools in Arkansas, and tries to see that this is stopped. And what ends up happening in the next school year, the 1958 to 1959 school year, is that public schools in Little Rock are closed. And many private schools remain open for white students only. And we see that this conflict leads to, all right, we might not have any of this opportunity for these students to get their education that they were promised to them. And it is not until the next year that classes return. An entire school year is really lost due to this debate, and this agitation, and this attempt to stop more integration like what had happened at Little Rock Central High School. But the plan is already in effect, and we see this begin to be carried out, that ultimately, yes, they must do this. This is what the Constitution says. We have to integrate schools, and we see this effort, this fight continue around the country. There are many other famous examples of students bravely desegregating their schools. Because it's one thing to say, all right, separate but equal is unconstitutional. It's another to be those brave 9 students who actually had to live up to it and fulfill that promise and go to a school where they were made to feel unwelcome, because it was the way to see that the Constitution's promise is guaranteed to everyone else. It's possible for everyone else. And all of the Little Rock 9 are able to finish and graduate high school. Many of them go off to college. All but one member of the Little Rock 9 is still living today, and they are able to share stories of their experiences and help to inform future generations, like all of us and all of you who are joining the call here, to talk about what they had learned and really how that shapes their idea of we the people and how the Constitution ought to protect us and the role that students like yourselves can really play in living up to that promise. Now, Madison, I know I've gone on for quite a bit here, but if we have any questions or anything like that, I'm certainly happy to help. I know we have probably a couple more minutes, would you say? Or if there's anything you wanted me to go take a look at, I'm certainly happy.
Thank you, Brian. It is just a little echoey, but would you mind, some of our friends want to see if you could zoom in to some of the videos there
Oh, yeah,
and
of
maybe
course.
provide some context to what's happening?
Oh, I would love to. Yeah. So the audio, this is going to be President Lyndon Johnson. And this is before announcing, this will be a few years afterwards. Obviously, we can see the text here. This is him preparing to announce the Civil Rights Act. We see this bit of information about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, I'm going to take us, after we see the clip here, Madison, I see a little bit, I'll move to another section of the gallery. But we can see there is Thurgood Marshall, who's later on for Supreme Court Justice. That is him celebrating that victory, that 1954 ruling, because he had argued in Brown versus Board of Education that separate but equal is unconstitutional. And 14 years later, he himself would be that member of the Supreme Court. I love this quote, by the way.
We did have another question in the chat, Brian, and I don't know if I know I don't know the answer to this exactly. I'm not sure if you do either, but about when were police no longer needed to protect students? Do we know?
That's a great question, because honestly, it varies quite a bit depending on the part of the country too. You know, we have a little bit more information there. I'm going to go make it to a little bit less, since I heard some comments about echo. I hope you don't mind, Madison, if I move to a different, maybe a little bit quieter spot of the exhibit space. Does that work for you?
Absolutely.
Of course. I'm moving to this panel right in front of Dr. King here. I love that quote, by the way, on the wall behind me. The architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. They were signing a promissory note to which every American was to call heir. They're basically saying, when you write this, we the people of the United States are looking to form a more perfect union and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, future generations like yourselves. Well, people are going to expect to live up to that. When you found a country with these statements that all men are created equal, or that the Constitution would add with the 14th Amendment equal protection of the law, people are going to want to see that lived up to. But that's a promise that needs to be fulfilled. But That is a great point though about where it varied, because some of these cases, the famous one of Ruby Bridges, that case is a good what, 4 years, 5 years the after the Little Rock Nine. That it varied, and because it was all deliberate speed, there are districts, school districts in some parts of the country that are not desegregated for nearly a decade after the Brown versus Board of Education, or even the Little Rock Nine's integration of Little Rock Central High School. That many districts took different definitions, because what does that mean? What's as fast as you can do? And this leads to a lot of that delay and debate, and a lot of other court cases about that. Oh, I see we have a question in the chat about, can we see the desks? Madison, what do you think? Should I get a good look at that?
Sure, go for it. They're a lot smaller than the desks I think we're used to seeing now.
I know. I'd almost think, like, do I try to sit in one? These are very 1950s era desks, school desks here. But these are probably more of an elementary one. Oh, this is Governor Faubus here, by the way. If we're wondering, this is the governor that was him giving a speech where he was trying to prevent the Little Rock Nine from attending school. That was, I said, the night before the first day of school, that he gave that speech, that he was going to call in the National Guard to prevent that. Let me give us a good look at this. Desks here. These are all a one-piece one. I apologize if I'll be a little tough here. I hope no one's writing in their desk, by the way.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States,
So you can pop it open so you can slide things inside it a little bit more easily.
directing the use of troops under federal authority to aid in
But,
the execution.
Maddie, I don't think I could actually fit sitting at one of those desks, as much as I might be tempted to try. I might
No
struggle.
worries. I thank you for showing us the desk though. We can probably move to a quieter spot in the exhibit. But friends, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in. This was a lot of fun talking about students in the movement. I did want to bring up that where Brian was earlier in front of this Martin Luther King Jr. panel here, that when Martin Luther King Jr. was younger, he heard on the radio, some of you may know that very famous clip, and I'll make sure to pop it in the chat, of Marian Anderson singing at the Lincoln Memorial, "My Country 'Tis of Thee," because she was denied the ability to sing at the Constitution Hall that was operated by the Daughters of the American Revolution. And she had a ton of people listen to this amazing performance she gave. And one of those people was a young Martin Luther King Jr. And he wrote about it later, just saying how inspiring it was. And, you know, look where he ended up later, right at the same exact spot, delivering those, you know, incredible words, that famous speech. Just really exciting to think about what you think of and what you hear as a student, and how you can kind of make change and use your voice in the future. So it's very exciting, and we're so excited to be able to celebrate the civil rights movement and students of the civil rights movement, because they played a huge role. They were incredibly brave, and it's so exciting to talk about the Little Rock Nine and those amazing students. But friends, I think we're about out of time, so I'm going to officially end this program here.